This class is a Q&A class where you get to ask anything that you want. And you don't have to be embarrassed.
Say again?
This is a Q&A class where what we do basically is open forum. We let people ask anything that they're interested in discussing, and we just let the conversation go in whatever direction. And it's really been like a great class because somebody always comes up with a question that leads us in directions that are unexpected, and we get into fabulous conversations. I have mine. I don't have yours. So I will open up the floor to you, and whoever is the first person to hit the buzzer and call out a question will be the first person. It's first come, first serve. You had a question in mind? That's why you came? What do you have? Don't be shy. I know you guys are not shy.
I'll ask.
Okay.
I've asked this to a few rabbis before, and you gave a different answer, so I'm going to get it. In your Kota Shacha, the last three brachot aren't like instead of saying like She'asani and that, it's like Shelo. And I don't get why you would just say like She'asani, you know? Like, why is it the opposite?
Okay. Does everybody understand the question? Should I... the recorder might not have heard your question, so I'm just going to re-say your question. So the question is, why is it that the brachot at the end that talk about our identity, like this is my hand.
I just realized.
Yeah, I just realized.
Who is that?
Yeah.
Me, you.
Yeah. That the brachot at the end of the morning brachot, where we say where we affirm that we're Jewish, that we are not slaves, or in the case of men they say Shelo Asani Isha. Why is it in the negative?
Yeah.
Right. That's the question. Why is it not in the positive?
Yeah.
I thought you were going to ask an even more basic question than that, or why do we say them at all? But why are they? So it's interesting that there are two Talmuds. There's something called Talmud Bavli, Babylonian Talmud, which is most of what our halakha comes from. And there's something called Talmud Yerushalmi, which is an older Talmud, actually, that was completed earlier than the Talmud Bavli and was completed in the land of Israel. It's interesting, they used to call the Jerusalem Talmud the Palestinian Talmud, but they decided to change that. I can leave it to your imagination why. But really in Hebrew it's called Talmud Yerushalmi. But for some reason they called it Palestinian Talmud in English for a long time. And then eventually they switched to Jerusalem Talmud. And so in the Talmud Yerushalmi, the version of the brachot is Shasani Yisrael. The version that it has is Shasani Yisrael, Shasani Ben Chorin. So there is a version out there. There was a version of the brachot that was a positive one, an affirming one instead of a negating one. Why it ends up being a negating one is it's a good question. Why that ends up being the final text? I suppose I would guess that it's easier to say what you're not than what you are, because what you are, and this is more of maybe a philosophical take on it, but I think that saying, She'asani Yisrael, let's say, or saying She'asani Ish, or saying She'asani Ben Chorin, is implying that it doesn't require any work on your part to be those things. In other words, Hashem didn't burden you, let's say, with being one of these categories that you don't want to be. Although the Shelo Asani Isha is a different issue altogether, but let's say a slave or a non-Jew. But really, if you said Shasani Yisrael, it would imply that being a Jew isn't up to you. It doesn't require you an investment of your time. So, for example, the Talmud suggests another bracha that maybe the scholars, maybe the Talmidei Chachamim should say that Hashem didn't make us Am Haaretz. Hashem didn't make us an ignoramus. So they said you can't really say that because first of all, it's not Hashem that decides whether you're going to be ignorant or not, it's you. And second of all, that's a little bit arrogant to say we're so smart, Hashem made us so smart. So saying the positive is more, I think, presumptuous maybe, because it's implying, that we're the complete package. I am a Jew, I am a Yisrael, it's true you are, but there's so much work that needs to be done to really fulfill that, to earn that, to be zochet to that. As opposed to when we say the negative, we're just saying Hashem didn't give us certain obstacles that would have held us back, but that doesn't mean that we're the full package yet. So to say a positive is like implying more maybe than we want to say. That's how I understand it. I mean, I suppose there could be other answers to that. Did you have a?
Oh, I just had a thought. Like,
what was your thought?
Just as it's the same thing as not the same thing, but let's say. Sorry, I get like really because my brain state. When you were saying that you're defining something as what it's not, it's much easier to say something that you're not versus what you are, because what you are is so much more than just one small statement, you know?
That's true too. It's a label is more restrictive than what you're not.
I thought that when you started talking,
that's a good point too. I thought about it more like if I claim the positive label, I'm claiming that I am the complete package. Mm-hmm. Whereas if I say that I'm not something, that's true, but that doesn't necessarily mean Hashem made me all I need to be. He just didn't make me certain things, but the rest is up to me. You know, to earn those other labels, I have to do something. So that's the way that I looked at it. But I think, you know, those two ideas are connected. Yeah, those ideas are connected. Yeah.
What does the Ger say? Does the Ger say?
So this is a big machloket. There's a big argument about whether a convert says Shelo Asani Goy or not. If you look in the Achronim, there are many who say they shouldn't say it because I'll tell you what the debate is, okay? On one hand, if somebody converts, how could they say Shelo Asani Goy to Hashem? Hashem did make them a Goy. They were the ones who became Jewish, so they can't say Shelo Asani Goy, it's not true. Right? On the other hand, if somebody goes on a journey to Judaism and becomes Jewish, certainly they see the hand of Hashem in that, right? They see the hand of Hashem in that. So just like we thank Hashem for everything else He does for us, even if we played a part in making it happen, so it's not crazy to say that Hashem didn't make us a non-Jew, a convert, to say that, because there's a sense in which, Hashem led them to become a Jew. We don't fully understand how that unfolded, but somehow Hashem was involved in that. So it's not unrealistic. So that's really the debate. The debate is a
rebirth.
It's like a rebirth. It says V'yata nefesh asu v'charan, that Avraham and Sarah made souls in Haran, meaning they brought people to believe in Hashem. It's like they created them anew. So a person who sees Hashem's hand in their life, it says Hashem really did make me into a Jew because He led me down this path to become a Jew. Right? So L'chad Ma'aseh it's a machloket. See, the Mishnah Berurah, for example, would tell you, well, you should be machmir and not say it because safek brachot lakel. I'm not so sure, because there's a very famous text that would seem to suggest the opposite, which is the very famous letter of Harambam to Ovadia Hager. Are you familiar with this famous letter? So the Rambam was asked by a person named Ovadia, who was probably originally Abdullah or something. He became a ger, and he wrote to Rambam and said, "I have a problem, because how can I say in the Tefillah, our God and the God of our forefathers, Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak v'Elohei Yaakov." Avraham was not necessarily. Let's say if he's a Muslim, maybe he believes Avraham is. But Yitzchak is not my ancestor. Yaakov is not my ancestor. How can I say our God and the God of our forefathers? I'm a new person in this nation. How can I say our? And so Rambam says that all the tefillot that a person says when a ger becomes a Jew, Avraham is their father. Yitzchak is their father, Yaakov is their father, because we don't look at it as a biological relationship. We look at it as a spiritual relationship. You are one of the children of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov through identification with the Jewish religion.
We even named them that.
Ben Avraham Avinu. Right, that's what we call them. When somebody converts, Ben Avraham Avinu. That's what we call them. And so the question would be on anybody. I mean, when we say Asher kiddishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu something, Hashem sanctified us with His mitzvot and commanded us. He didn't command us; He commanded some other people, and then I joined later because I converted. No. We don't look at it that way. Once you join, you join, and all of the tefillot that you say are the same. And Harambam doesn't say anything about they shouldn't say Shelo Asani Goy or any other exceptions to the rule. So my interpretation of that, my takeaway from that is that he thought that in the same way that a person, once you become a Jew, you can say Shelo Asani Goy. Hashem did not make me a non-Jew because Hashem gave me the means to become a Jew, and that he would agree with that philosophy, that idea that we don't look at biologically. Yes, Hashem biologically made me a non-Jew, but we don't look at the biology here. We're looking at the spirituality of it, and in that framework, Hashem led me to this, gave me the opportunity, gave me the tools, gave me the halachic mechanism, let's say, to be able to convert. So everything that was necessary for me to convert really came from Hashem, including the path that led me here. So I can say, Shelo Asani Goy, Hashem didn't make me a non-Jew, he made me a Jew. Or as they would say, Shasani Yisrael, if they put it in the positive, but the same idea. Okay, so I think that's definitely true. But it's a machloket. It's argued. It's debated. Yes.
I wanted to hear your opinion on a person's prayer and what you think Hashem takes in based on their level. Like there are people who pray for Siddur properly and everything, and then there are people who necessarily don't know how to read Hebrew, and there are people who pray, like just speak to Hashem, have their conversations, like at the right time, put some time for it, put time aside for it and everything. But what about somebody who is capable of praying and can read Hebrew, and it's just a factor of time? What do you think Hashem would take in? Like if a person really wants something and they just decide to speak instead of actually praying from Siddur.
Okay, so the question is, what's the status of like informal prayer? Let's say informal.
Status and your opinion on it.
What?
Your opinion on it.
You just want to know what I think about that? I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, there are,
Everything is per person. Like it's what the person is capable of.
Ultimately, there's two dimensions of everything in Judaism, right? There's the ultimate reality of what's going on behind the scenes, let's say that only Hashem knows. And then there's what you might call like the reality of halacha, which are the rules on the books. Okay? And particularly when it comes to things like tefillah. It's very complicated because tefillah really cuts to the core of the person and their relationship with Hashem, which is very hard to formally structure. So even the idea of having formal tefillot is a relatively late invention. I mean, the Torah doesn't prescribe fixed tefillot. That was something that came during the second Beit HaMikdash. So the original tefillah was spontaneous and an expression of who the person was, and there were some guidelines. There had to be some praise of Hashem, some request, some thank you, but essentially it was fluid, and it was based on the individual, as long as each day they had some connection, some involvement. So the rabbis came along and they decided to make that more of a formal structure. It has a plus and a minus to it. The plus is that, of course, it keeps us involved, even when it's hard to deal with something as fluid and as vague as, try to throw together a prayer each day. It's too vague. So it gives us, it makes sure that we stay on a program. But on the other hand, it can take away that spontaneity or that natural kind of connection to Hashem that's supposed to be there. And it can become a substitute for that. So the Mishnah even says, a person shouldn't be oset filato keva, which means he shouldn't make, or she shouldn't make prayer a fixed ritual that they do. That's also bad. Meaning, if the heart is not in it, if the mind is not in it, then it's just a motion that you're going through. It doesn't mean anything. And obviously, ultimately, so in the framework of halacha, a person has a certain number of tefillot they're supposed to do a day with a certain text and all that, and certainly that's required. But in the spiritual framework, a person could be in a situation where they, in a very sincere way, call out to Hashem and have some transformative tefillah that really comes from the heart, and in that moment, it made a difference. It says in what we read in the fast days that, before we call out to Hashem, He already answers us. Terem Yikra Bani is the verse, right? Before they call, I'm already answering, which means it's not about the words that come out, it's about what's in the person's mind and heart. As soon as they're ready, as soon as they are worthy of Hashem answering their tefillah, Hashem knows He doesn't need you to tell Him words. You understand what I'm saying? So yeah, ultimately the answer to prayer and the relationship between Hashem and a person, or between the person and Hashem, can't be quantified in terms of any structured ritual. But the structured rituals are meant to keep us on the program and to keep us focused, and not to be a substitute for that. So there's a balance. So yeah, of course, tefillah that's just a spontaneous tefillah is good too. We see many examples of that, even in the Talmud where they had fixed prayer. Sometimes, somebody would get up. Avinu Malkeinu, there's a story in Masachet Ta'anit. How did Avinu Malkeinu happen? One time there was a drought, and Rabbi Akiva gets up and starts saying Avinu Malkeinu, just out of nowhere. He just said Avinu Malkeinu. So now we have it as a list in the Siddur of Avinu Malkeinu, but it wasn't like that. It was just something that he was inspired to do Avinu Malkeinu. The prayer was answered, and people said, "Hey, if the prayer was answered, that's a good sign. We should adopt that prayer. It must be a good prayer." That was Rabbi Akiva. Now, what's the drawback of it? The drawback of that is once you say, "Well, those magic words worked really well. We should take those magic words," so then you lose the whole thought behind it. You lose the whole heart behind it. Potentially, you run the risk of doing that. And how many times have we run through an Amidah thinking we're so good that we're doing the Amidah, but really there's no kavanah there, and we're using it as a substitute. There's a pasuk in Mishlei, so you know the Mishlei, right? There's a pasuk that says, "Zevach rishaim toavat Hashem, utfilat yisharim ritzono." That the offering of the wicked person is an abomination to Hashem, but the prayer of the upright person is what he wants. So what is the connection between those two things? This is in the Mishlei class, but that a person, a zevach, is something you give to God. Okay, in a ritualistic way. Even a wicked person can do that. Meaning they can go through motions, they can give a sacrifice, or they can even give a prayer. They can read the Siddur. It doesn't necessarily mean anything to them. That's Zevach Rishayim Toavat Hashem. Hashem rejects that because the person thinks that they're doing a great service to God, but really all they're doing is an outward action that they think is going to convince Hashem to do what they want. They think it's going to persuade Hashem or put pressure on Hashem to do what they want. Whereas Tfilat Yisharim Ritzono, his real desire is the prayer of the righteous person, not the offering, but the prayer, because the prayer that comes from the upright person is coming from the heart, and the person is drawing themselves closer to Hashem through that prayer, and that's why that's going to make a difference. Because real tefillah is not just about saying what you want to Hashem, but trying to become more of the person Hashem wants you to be, so that you can be worthy of what you're asking of Hashem. Just saying the same words again and again is not going to get an answer. Much like with human beings, just asking for the same thing again and again and again, you're nagging them, they don't want to do anything for you. Right? I mean, even a human being doesn't necessarily respond to that. And yet people think if they say the same prayer 500 times, all of a sudden after the 500th time, Hashem is going to respond to them. But if there's no change of the person, through some kind of, I need to take a few steps closer to Hashem and then do the prayer so that I'm not the same person that I was before. And now that I'm not the same person I was before, Hashem is looking at the whole situation differently. Whereas it's like, lahavdil, and don't take this the wrong way, but somebody who comes to like the parole board, they're in jail, and because they've been on good behavior, and they've shown a lot of improvement, and they've been rehabilitated, so, they have another chance. But if they look and you're the same guy that you were when you came in, or the same girl that you were when you came into the jail, then making the request to be let out is as good as the original trial. It's going to be the same verdict that you have to go back to jail. So when it comes to Hashem, it's lahavdil. Obviously, it's not precisely the same, but it's similar. That to the extent that we've changed through our tefillah, and the tefillah shows our change, Hashem looks at us as different people. But to the extent that we really stay the same and we just say words, it's as good as offering a sacrifice without any internal change.
But Moshe Rabbeinu, he was up, he couldn't go right into church. He prayed like
he tried.
120 times. Right. I was like, oh, what did it help? You're not going to get in anyway. Well, what's the point of your davening 100
But he didn't know that.
He didn't know that.
He didn't know that. He didn't know till the end.
Sorry.
No, it was legit. It's legitimate to pray a lot if you think that you still might get there. But just reading the words is not all that it's about. And I think sometimes the formal tefillah can take away from that, and the more informal tefillah is more substantive because it's really coming from where we are. And you combine the two, right? Right, the halakha allows that, yeah.
No, but you touched upon the formula that the Chacham Rambam brings down, and you
touch
Yeah, you
upon
can
it
add
quickly.
in.
No,
Sure.
no, other than the adding in, if you have an informal tefillah, accepting that there is a God making mention, then your personal request, and then thanking,
Right, the deoraita,
then you're creating. Although it's
right, you're following the format.
You're
following the format. And even within the Amidah, you're allowed to add things. You know that, right? You're allowed to put things in, insert requests.
How come did Moshe Rabbeinu, why Hashem didn't forgive him? Why did he didn't?
That's a long story. That's a long story.
After the 122 times he said, forgive me, I didn't mean to hit the rock, or I spoke the rock, I hit the rock, or what did I...
Sometimes saying sorry isn't good enough.
Especially when
Have you ever heard that? You know, it was a big. The problem was actually I talked about this on the very first night of the Beit Midrash. On the very first night that we had Beit Midrash, on the inaugural night, I talked about the subject of why Moshe Rabbeinu, why the sin was so bad, and the reason why was because it was a Chilul Hashem that all these years Moshe Rabbeinu has been trying to make clear to the people that everything he does is representing Hashem and Hashem's will, and this was the first time that he messed up. And so it undermines everything that he had built up till that point, and that's why it was such a terrible outcome.
So let's say, going back to the whole Amidah and Tefillah, when, let's say you get the formula right for saying Amidah, i.e., it's not, you're taking the structure of the prayers in order to connect to God.
Right.
Now, the thing I struggle with is, you say the Amidah, and let's say you really concentrate and in every prayer you apply the relevancy of it,
right,
to everything. And then 15 minutes later, or half an hour later, let's say on Rosh Chodesh, you have to say Musaf.
Right.
And you have to say it again.
Right.
I mean, it's kind of hard to recharge and...
That's true. I don't think that there's any simple answer to that problem.
Right.
I find that the more a person, the best approach, and this is just my totally subjective advice from my own experience, is that the best approach to trying to deepen your appreciation of tefillah is to take time out of times when you're not praying to really study the tefillot, because I think that I personally, always, even though I've been obviously praying for many, many years, I'm always discovering new things about the tefillah. Even in the text of the tefillah, I'll discover new things, interesting patterns or interesting uses of words or interesting ideas that I never paid attention to before. And if a person has that orientation that they're looking for something novel in the prayers, and then when they go back to the prayer, that's what stands out for them, so that their tefillah is really something, an evolving process, and it doesn't stay stagnant. And so, let's say for the Rosh Chodesh Amidah, you're right, a lot of times Rosh Chodesh and also even Shabbat to some extent, although less because we have the interruption of the Torah reading, can be, kind of a overkill feeling, because, we just did the Amidah, we're doing it again. Sometimes when we do Mincha Arvit, you feel that way. Yeah. Right? You just did the Mincha, do it again. So, I think that the key is, like the Chazal say, that, one of the signs of a person whose tefillah's of value is that they could be mechadish badavar. They could add something new to it, in other words. So try to find something new. It doesn't have to be that every moment of that tefillah is just going to be so exhilarating, because after all, you just did the Amidah, but try to find some point of connection to it that's new than what you had before, and that gives it some quality. I don't think that we can be superhuman in our tefillot. We have to be realistic, and 90% of the time we're distracted even during the tefillah. That's human nature. But to try to find something in it that you connect to each time, and even if it's something different, like say, hey, this week I'm going to focus on this particular baracha in the Amidah, and I'm going to really think about the words carefully, something that I don't usually do. And I'm going to look, hey, why does it use this turn of phrase, and why does it use these words? What do they mean to me, and what are they? How can I connect to them? Especially because I find, again, I'm just speaking subjectively, maybe you'll tell me this isn't your experience, but the first few requests are so much closer to our immediate needs. We ask for wisdom, we ask for self-improvement, forgiveness, and we ask for healing, and we ask for a bracha, material blessing, and then we start talking about things that are very general, like redemption, and we talk about, the ingathering of exiles, and Hashiva Shofetenu, bringing, good judges, and getting rid of the wicked people, and bring tzaddik, and helping tzaddikim. It becomes more further from our immediate range of needs. So maybe, taking one of those brachot and saying, why is this in the Amidah? Why am I asking for this? What does it mean to me? If you've ever been to traffic court, maybe you can appreciate, Hashiva Shofateinu Kivarishana. Not that you ever would have gone to traffic court. Nassau traffic court is easy because they always give you a plea bargain. Nassau traffic court, they would give you a plea bargain.
I have two questions. One is Ramban.
Not that I ever went.
Two questions. Ramban brings the question of Amidah. If somebody doesn't have in the kavanah for Tifla,
the first time,
then you have to go. Yeah, then you have to go back. And then today we don't hold that kavanah.
If you do that, we should hold that. There are people who say that, but really you should be sure to at least understand the meaning of the words in the first paragraph.
There's no guarantee that the second time around.
Right. The problem is that you're going to be just as bad the second time. That's why that's the reason why. But a person should try to. Listen, if a person is accustomed to actually concentrating on the meaning of the words in the first paragraph, and one time they didn't, then they should go back. But if a person knows that they're going to be just as bad the second time than the first time, so then it's a waste of time to go back.
Shema you can, right?
The Shema, the first pasuk,
you're allowed
for
to
sure. You need to.
So,
yeah, the Shema for sure. Even the Amidah, if you normally do concentrate in the first paragraph like you're supposed to, and one time you were distracted, then you would go back. Everybody would agree you would go back then.
In the tefillah we have today, how many there are less bakashot? There are a lot of bakashot in the tefillah.
More or less than what?
Shacharit and then Minchad and Arvit. Do we have all these? They're all their bakashot, or there's only they come from Tehillim, or they come?
Well, the text of the tefillah. If you read the Amidah, you will see that as typical for the rabbis, who wrote from that period of time, almost every phrase in the Amidah is found somewhere in the Tanakh. Almost every phrase is somewhere in the Tanakh.
That's what you're saying, right?
I'm talking about the body of the Amidah. Certainly, Hashem Sefatai Tisach Yagiti Latecha is a pasuk from Tehillim. Yula Ratzon Refi is a pasuk from Tehillim. But even the actual text of the Amidah, almost every phrase, if not every phrase, Ha'el HaGadol HaGibor VaNorah is Moshe Rabbeinu. El Elyon is Avraham Avinu. El Elyon Konei Shamayim V'Aretz. So almost every phrase every term that's used, every phrase, Hashiva Shofateinu Kivarishana, everything is somewhere in the Tanakh. So they took the verse from Tanakh, but they structured it as brachot. They took verses, they took ideas from the Tanakh, and they made it into either praises of Hashem in an order that makes sense, or requests from Hashem, which are the body of it. That's the request in the middle, the 13 brachot in the middle, the shorter of the brachot, and then thank you, modim, from modim on, or from ritzei on is the thank you section. So these are the three sections. The in the middle part, you're allowed to add your own prayers. You know that, right? You're allowed to. So let's say you really are having a difficulty understanding the Parashat HaShavua or something like that. Right, so you said, I'm just making an example. So you said, Atah chonen adam da'at u'melabed rosh binah, and Hashem, please help me with this pasuk. I don't understand what it's talking about, and I need help. You're allowed to do that. You're allowed to add in every bracha me'ena bracha, which means it has to be consistent with the theme of that bracha. So when you're asking Hashem for wisdom, don't ask Him for money. You have to be on the theme. So in Atah chonen, it would be wisdom. And when it's Hashivenu Avinu, and you say, I'm having a really hard time stopping from saying Lashon Hara. So please Hashem, help me with that. Selach lanu Avinu, forgiveness. Hashem, please forgive me. I did something bad. You're allowed to connect personally, and the reason why the Chazal did that is exactly what you're talking about, because you want to be able to preserve that spontaneity of tefillah. The rabbis didn't want to stamp out that part. They just wanted to give a structure for people. So within the structure, you have freedom. So Rifa'enu, and then you want to pray for somebody who's sick. Barachenu, and then you have problem.
That's so hard to just say the prayer from the Siddur and then stop and say whatever you want to say and then go.
I say the fact that it's hard is good. I say the fact that it's hard is good. Because if it were easy, then it would just be another ritualized thing that didn't mean anything. This way, you really have to work at it.
Hard.
It's long. So don't do all of them. Don't do all of them. You can.
I'd rather say all than go and just waste.
You don't have to add your own into all. Or what you could do is, here's another way to do it. in Shema Kolenu, the last request, you're allowed to put anything you want. So let's say you have 10 requests. Instead of putting each one, in the particular bracha, when you get to Shema Kolenu, you're allowed to put in fact, in many of the Sidurim, at least the Sephardic ones, they have long bakashot that you could add.
I thought that was in red set.
Shema Kolenu, you can put in whatever you want.
This whole time I've been doing it in red set.
Really? No, it's in Shema Kolenu, right before you say the last line, Ki ata shomea tefilot kol peh, you can put whatever you want.
I think you'll be fine either way.
Yeah.
I don't think
Hashem is going to strike you down for that, but now that you know, you should do it the right place. But it's in Shema Kolenu. It's a catch-all, so you're allowed to. The reason why they also had a concept which we don't do today called Tefilat Nedava that you could do. There are 3 required tefillot during the day: Shacharit, Mincha, and Arvit. Well, Arvit's not so required, but there are 3 mandatory tefillot. And then there's such a thing as Tefilat Nedava, which means you can add. Let's say at 11 o'clock in the morning, there's no Shacharit, or let's say you already prayed Mincha, and some problem happens in your life, and you really want to pray again. You could pray again, Tefilat Nedava. You want to pray even after that, another Tefilah. So that's legitimate according to Halakha. Which one Esrei. However, we don't do them today.
We only permit Mincha, though, no?
Well,
if you pray Shacharit, it's not
even in Shacharit, you could do Tefilat Nedava anytime. The only problem is that they say nowadays not to do Tefilat Nedava because of the same reason that they say not to repeat Amidah, which is people don't have enough kavanah. In a situation where people really had such kavanah, such pristine kavanah in the tefillot that they're required to do, okay, so you could add them. But if you're not having such excellent kavanah in the tefillot that you're already saying and that you're required to say, why are you adding more problems, right? Why would you want to have more tefillot that you're not going to concentrate during? That wouldn't be a good idea. So that's why we generally don't do it. That's why you're not allowed to do it on Shabbat, because you can't bring a korban nedava on Shabbat. So it's like the korbanot. They structured it like the korbanot. Yes.
How do you feel about Tehillim and praying Tehillim for something? People who just read Tehillim without knowing.
Well, I think that it's not fundamentally different than any other tefillah that could be done either with kavanah or not.
But do you think it's better to pray using your own words about, let's say, Israel or someone's Revuah Shlema, or do you think it's better to read words of Tehillim without knowing what it means?
Does it have to be such an extreme dichotomy? Are those the only 2 options?
No, you can.
There could be something in between, like I would feel. I think the reason why Tehillim is so great and why we use it so much in so many different settings in Judaism is because these are tefillot written by somebody with the greatest mastery of how a tefillah should be written. So certainly using those tefillot of David HaMelech is a great benefit to us. But as with any tefillah, understanding it is important, and Tehillim, among books of the that we have, is one of the more difficult ones to understand because it's written in very complex poetry. A lot of the language is foreign to us. Even a person with the best of intentions, there's some Tehillim that even the Mefarshim don't know what they're really talking about. So, if we can't, then we shouldn't feel bad. But to focus on the Tehillim that really help us to get in the right mindset, and then to follow that up with our own tefillah. That's really how it's usually, how it's ideally done. I think it's ideally done that the Tehillim gives you a framework. It gives you it puts you in the right state of mind. It gives you a kind of a template and a framework for your tefillah, and then you follow up with your own personal prayer. So the Tehillim helps you along. But like with any formal text, kavanah can always be lost in the shuffle. People will just say, read these 20 Tehillim for whatever purpose, and it's like, it's not magic. It's if we're not improving ourselves by reading the Tehillim somehow, if we're not pulling ourselves higher or improving ourselves, then why would Hashem hearing us say Tehillim 25 times? So if Hamas says Tehillim, maybe it's going to work against us. God forbid, not that they would, but I'm just saying, if it's a magical formula, it should work on both sides. If it has nothing to do with the zechut of the person, so then it's just a magical incantation, so then the people on the other side could use it against us. That's not what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be something that inspires us to greater kavanah.
What's the
segulot? What is the question?
Quota. Does that make sense? Or because you still look like you want to follow up?
No, because if someone tells me to read Tehillim for someone else, should I just be opening a Tehillim? I don't know. It doesn't do anything for me. I don't feel like it's a prayer. And everyone expects you to.
I know, it's one of those...
I asked the rabbi about this also, and he told me that it's best to find out more about the situation. Like, we get texts and emails nowadays, pray for
pray for this person and that person, right.
And like today also, we found so many different things.
Sure, there's so many things,
soldiers and
right.
stuff like that, but I was told it's best to find out more about the person, more about the details, so that you could feel something.
Right, so you have a connection. So, the primary way to pray, the number one way to pray, if you look at the way that we always use Tehillim in the formal liturgy, like in our actual liturgy, it's always in connection with some other blessing or prayer. So, like even in Birkat HaLevana, when we do the blessing of the moon each month, after Rosh Chodesh, we start with all these Tehillim, and we end with a baracha, or there's a baracha in there. Right? Even the Psukei de Zimra, we start with the baracha, we end with the baracha, and it goes into the rest of the prayers. So even though we have lots of Tehillim, it's always in some kind of framework. So I think the Tehillim are really, really, obviously extremely valuable. And like with any tefillah, it's going to be relative to your level of understanding it. So for some people, the best way to pray for someone might just be, certainly like you said, to know more about the situation so you feel connected. I think we all pray for the situation in Israel, and we care. We all have a sense of identification and concern for all of the chayalim and for all the soldiers. And even without knowing the specific things about them, it feels like a great personal loss when any of them are lost. And I think that's part of our sense of brotherhood and sisterhood with Am Yisrael, which is great. So we can pray for them in our Amidah, and
is there an
certainly.
alternative? If I don't want to go and sit and read Tehillim, is there a better or a different way I could really pray?
Well, I think the best thing is to pray the Amidah of Shacharit, Mincha, or Arvit, or all three of them, and put the names in and pray for them in the Amidah. That's like the classic way to pray. I'm not knocking Tehillim as the Talmud says that using Tehillim as an incantation is asur. You're not supposed to say psukim as an incantation. That doesn't mean you shouldn't read Tehillim, but if it becomes a magical incantation, then you're running the risk of really, in a way, disrespecting the Tehillim, because David HaMelech didn't write these words for us just to mumble through them for people's refuah shlema. They have so much beauty to them that we're missing. So to study them and understand them, the best zechut is Talmud Torah and Tefillah. So if you wanted to really make the most out of Tehillim, have a group that studies Tehillim instead of reading it. That's that would be the greatest.
The source for the Tehillim is Asar.
It's in Masechet Shavuot.
That's all I need.
What daf it is, I don't exactly remember. I think it's at the end of one of the prakim.
What's the question?
But what's the source where it says you're not supposed to read Tehillim for refuah for somebody? It's in Masechet Shavuot, and I believe it's also mentioned Masechet Berachot. Yeah, no, for sure. It's in Masechet Shavuot. It's in Masechet Berachot also. I believe.
No, as an incantation.
Right.
So what about this?
For refuah, it says like for healing. So I'm saying psukim to heal someone.
Isn't there this Tehillim book with all the segulot? Read this one for broken legs, this one for broken shoulder.
Oh, sure, yeah, I've seen those. I don't.
So
I'm not saying.
I saw that one. It was like eye, ear, shoulder.
If you have a broken shoulder, the best segulot is to go to a doctor.
Ask the Rambam. Rambam
Somebody asked me, what's the best segulot for Parnasah? I told them, get a job. That's the best segulot. Best segulot to become Talmid Chacham is to learn Torah. There's a lot of easy segulot. You don't have to look that far. But truthfully, those things may be, there may be some thematic connection between those problems. I haven't looked at every one of them. I assume that, some of them were made by rabbis who really knew a lot about the Tehillim and probably saw some connection between the theme of that mizmor and that problem. So, if it's understood that way as, it's all about your attitude towards it. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. It's all about your attitude towards it. So if I look at these words, like people will read the Kabbalah, for example. The Kabbalah is very deep, but it's a very profound thing. So let's say they take the book of Zohar and they just read endless passages of Zohar. They have no idea what they're talking about, and so somehow that's supposed to be a segula. But understand any of the context. Like, if they really studied that and understood it, so then I could see how that could be a very significant accomplishment that really would deepen the person. It would really make the person grow. So if they read the Tehillim and they're really thinking about the meaning of it, that could really make the person grow. But just to read it, right, there's many. But if you took a book of calculus written in Chinese and read it, it doesn't mean anything. You're not going to learn any math from that, right? It's not going to make you a professor of mathematics. So the segulot are sometimes take something that could be very deep and reduce it to something less than what it could be, because it wants to make it into something simple and ritualized that we can do without thinking too much. But what all the Nevi'im were against was that if you read the Navi, especially this time as we're coming to Tisha B'Av, look at all the Nevi'im that they criticized the Jews, before the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. What was the biggest criticism? Too many korbanot, too much outward service, ritualized service of Hashem, not enough looking inside and saying, who am I as a person? Okay? But this comes with tefillah too. You could say 5,000 Mizmorei Tehillim and be the same scoundrel that you were when you started reading Tehillim. I'm not saying that you're a scoundrel. Nobody here is a scoundrel. I'm just saying the individual who is not here, who read thousands of what?
Nobody learns enough yet.
That's the problem too.
Haredi Judaism.
That's true. That's a whole other issue. We've talked about that before. Yes.
I missed that one.
Would an adopted child have to be shown
That's an excellent question. That's a discussion. Okay, the question was, does an adopted child? It's a good question. I'm glad you asked. Does an adopted child have to be shomer nigeh with their parents? Okay, so it's a good question. It is that. So this question has been discussed and has been. What? Well, for sure, it depends on what. I mean, shomer nigeh wouldn't be an issue before a certain age. Right. So, the real issue is what is, there are lots of poskim that opine on this, So you have poskim that take a, of course, more right-wing view and say absolutely not, it's asur. And then you have people who take a more nuanced view and say, well, the person, has a relationship with these people as their parents. Let's say they grew up with them as their parents, they relate to them as parents. So, it's my thought about it is that it's really, you have to use common sense. Common sense is not that common, but you need to use common sense and look at the situation. There are situations where a parent should be shomer nigeh with their child because the parent has problems, and is inappropriate, And then there are situations where something could be very innocuous, and it depends upon the context and the nature of the relationship. So if you have people who have the nature of a relationship is parental, and their connection with the real issue, of course, with shomer nigeh isn't the touching, but the inappropriate, where it leads to. In other words, in terms of romantic or sexual development of the.
It's not inappropriate at all, and that the parent isn't weird like that, whatever.
Right.
I think if they're adopted as a baby, fine. It's not a problem. But let's say a girl that's adopted when she's 12, 13, 14, 15, it would be weird to touch you.
Right. On the other hand, there are emotional factors the other way. So, they need that. They might need that. You have to look at the situation. So, I hear what you're saying. I think it's very situational, and everybody in a circumstance like that should consult with a rabbi about the particular circumstance, because a lot of factors have to be weighed. What is the nature of the relationship? What kind of a parent is it, and what kind of a child is it, and what are their needs, and what's the context? There are issues about yichud also. So how could you be alone with the child? So now you have a whole other issue of what ends up happening that could be to the opposite side is that you're taking a relationship that's supposed to be very wholesome, and you're actually introducing elements to it that by following those halachot, you could potentially be introducing elements into the situation that taint the relationship, because why are you even thinking about that? You can't be, you're my parent, So it's very complicated. I don't think it's so simple. So I wouldn't want to give one blanket answer. I would say that some situations for sure it would be an issue, and others not. And certainly adopted as a baby, although there are some who even there are machmir on it. I think that's an area where there's a lot more accepted leeway. But even later, I think that you really have to consider the specifics of circumstances. I don't think it's fair to make a general. I agree with you. It could sometimes be creepy. But you have problems like that with step parents also.
Yeah.
You have step parent issues with shomer negiah, with yichud, and with creepiness and inappropriateness of all sorts, and you really have to.
That's totally different than a parent who says, "I really want a child, and I'm going to adopt this child." That's not like, okay, I'm going to marry this child's mom, and I could be a creep.
That's true. That is true.
It's not the same
right.
thing.
Somebody who is structuring the relationship from the outset in a certain way.
Their intention.
I think it is a halacha where we look at the intention, because it's a halacha where the definition of the type of touching is prohibited is derech hiba, which means a romantic type of touching, a romantic type of interaction. So the kavanah, or the context of the relationship, the emotional context of the relationship does have something to say. It's not a taboo. It's not a taboo system. You have to look really at the context. So I would say, ask your local Orthodox rabbi.
So if somebody adopted some goy, then he's automatic. If a goy, a Jew, adopted a goy,
right,
then automatically he become Jewish. He doesn't have to go to.
He has to convert. No, of course he has to convert.
No,
he has to convert.
Yeah.
The baby would have to convert. The question is whether, if you have opposite sex parents and children where there's an adoption situation, what's the status of their relationship and what are the boundaries that they have to observe between them? It's an excellent question. It's a hotly debated issue. So I would say you really have to look at the context situation.
Rabbi, he has a question for you.
I was actually going to point out, before we talk about prayer, there used to be this ancient prayer called Havinenu. I don't know.
Sure, yeah.
So like that's like the Talmud Yerushalmi, and that's like
Talmud Bavli too.
I think So that's like kind of a good alternative if people are like kind of having a hard time focusing, and like that the purpose of that prayer is that like you don't like lose focus, and then maybe you're in a.
It's really short.
It's short. It's
so there's
short, but then you can add in your prayers.
Right. So what the Talmud actually talks about people. Talmud Masechet Brachot talks about people who are in a emergency situation where they're on the move and they don't have the time to say an entire Amidah.
Like soldiers also.
So there's two types. There's something that they call Tefillah Ktsara, which is like a one-line Tefillah, which doesn't really count for. It's sort of like, well, if there's absolutely nothing you can say this one line and at least you did something, but it doesn't really count. If you get home in time for Mincha, you have to do Mincha, right? But then there's something called Havinenu. Havinenu is a tefillah where you say the first three brachot normally, the first three regular brachot of the Amidah, and you say the last three brachot of the Amidah, and the middle, instead of there being 13 requests, there's one paragraph that's all 13 of the requests. Summary of them.
So Rambam didn't.
So it would be like a phrase for each request, right? Like instead of an entire 2 lines, or in the case of some of the brachot, 3 or 4 or 5 lines, it's all of those brachot consolidated into one paragraph, like with 3 words signifying each. So that's called Havinenu, and there are some problems with Havinenu. For example, Motzei Shabbat, you can't say Havinenu. You can't say Havinenu when you're saying Barech Aleinu. You can only say it during this time of year. There are all kinds of issues saying Barech, saying Havinenu.
So interesting.
Right. So now it exists on the books as a. Yeah. The Talmud. The Gemara even asks the question, why can't you just put V'ten Talmud Libracha into Havinenu, but it doesn't answer it. Yeah. So, but it's not. So if you look at Sidurim, most regular Sidurim now don't include Havinenu anymore. In the Ashkenazi world, in the Birnbaum Sidur, which was the old Sidur that they used to use, has it, but the Art Scroll generally doesn't have it. In the Sephardic Sidurim, I haven't found it, but in the Koren Sidur, the Sephardic Koren Sidur, it has Havinenu. So, right. So in order,
It wasn't written by me.
So in order to say Havinenu, you have to say the first 3 regular brachot of the Amidah. Then you say this Havinenu in the middle, and then you say the last 3 brachot. It's for somebody who is in fact, there is one opinion in the Mishnah that's all you should say all the time. You just you don't ever have to say the 19 brachot, but we don't do that. We say, listen, if somebody says the 19 brachot, that's best. But if a person is pressed for time, or they're on the run, or they're somewhere where they can't stand for long enough to do the entire Amidah, this is an alternative. So it's something which is halachically legitimate. if a person needs to use it, and there's no reason why we should discourage someone from using it as long as it's done at the times that you're allowed to use it.
I have a question.
Okay, this has to be our last one because we're going to run over time.
All right.
But we already did.
This is just for the crowd, not for my sake, because I already have my opinion. But I just want to hear what you have to say about this. What's your take on praying by graves?
Oh, I was thinking about
Great
that.
question.
I was like, I hope someone asked that.
Praying by graves?
No.
You're not allowed.
You're not allowed.
Right.
You're not
Yeah, you're not allowed.
Unless it's in our own.
Right. So, again, I would go back to what I said before. Well, you're not allowed within 4 amot of a grave. You're not supposed to say divrei Torah. So it's a problem, when people go up to it and say,
You're allowed to do that.
right. Well, because they're not right on top of the grave. Right. They have something they're above it. So there is, there's an idea that's brought in Midrashim, that's cited in Midrashim. Like, for example, it says Kalev went and prayed by Marata Machpelah. It talks about Chizkiyahu HaMelech dying, and they built a Beit Midrash right next to his kever to say, to honor his memory. So, and they would learn Torah right next to the grave of Chizkiyahu HaMelech. So you certainly have precedent for the idea of learning Torah or praying in proximity to someone who passed away. But you'll notice that in Christianity, for example, especially Catholic Christianity, they build churches on top of graves on purpose. Whereas they
have tombs inside.
Right, they have tombs in the church on the bottom level of the church. Yeah, so that, or even on the main level. So we don't have that. Now, a lot of it has to do again with what is the person's kavanah. What is a person's intent in the prayer? A lot of it has to do with kavanah. So if a person goes to the grave because they are asking the person who's dead to do something, right? In other words, they are speaking to the person, the deceased person, that is totally prohibited by the Torah. That's called Doresh El HaMetim. You're definitely not allowed to do that. So speaking to those who...
Shouldn't you be strict on the Doraita law then? Shouldn't you stay away from...
It's very blurry in the Zechut.
If you're... A lot of the... I noticed that at some of the places in Eretz Israel now, at least, when I saw, they had signs up that said, do not pray to the deceased, pray to Hashem. And the Zechut of the... so that's the if you look at the actual precedent, what it says Kalev did was not that he prayed to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, that he went and prayed by the kever. Why? Because Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov were people who were alone against the entire world in keeping to their principles, and Kalev was somebody who was alone against all the Meraglim in keeping to his principles. He didn't even have, like Yehoshua, at least had Moshe Rabbeinu as his person to back him up. Kalev is the person who comes out of nowhere because he was a nobody before the Chet HaMeraglim. So where does he come? So he gets his strength from Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Look how strong they were to stand up against the entire world and believe what they believed. So if that inspires you, that you think, like when I went to the kever of the Rambam, which in Tiberia, it inspires you to think of this great person and what they achieved. It inspires you to pray with great kavanah. But I wouldn't think of it as I'm speaking to him. He tells you not to.
He says not to go.
Right, he says not to. So does Vilna Gaon
also the Vilna Gaon is against Vilna
Vilna Gaon said not even to go.
And we were just there, and people throwing themselves on.
Right.
Couldn't stand it.
Right. The problem is when it becomes a type of ancestor worship, or something like that.
People
okay.
were on the floor.
Right. People to right. The Rambam says. I don't remember a Rambam actually talking about tefillot at the kever. I remember him saying not to go. Right. He just says don't visit them at all. Right. So he says Rambam says we don't visit graves. That's what the Rambam.
You know where you got it from?
He doesn't say it's asur to go. He says we don't. He says don't. It says don't. He says not to. So the Vilna Gaon had a tradition not to visit them.
So Rabbi, can I just say, now that everyone kind of heard what we had to say, I'll just add what my view on that, and I'll tell you.
You mean you didn't change your mind?
No. I agree with what you're saying, but I would answer. I have an answer for why we can pray by our avot. Is the same thing as same way I can go to my grandfather's grave to to visit out of respect. It's my family. So if I'm going to one of the avot, it's different than if I go. Moshe, we're not even told where he's buried because we don't want it to turn into shrine for worship.
Right.
So it's a kal v'chomer that someone like the Lubavitcher Rebbe that yes, some people might have the kavanah, but if someone it's even a halacha, if there's a tree that is used for avodah zarah, you can't get any benefit from that tree. You can't use that tree for any reason. So the same thing is if people are praying, there's some people who have bad
the wrong intentions
when they're there. I'd rather stay away from that type of place.
Well, there's definitely no requirement to go.
You're saying you could rely on the fact that someone may have used it for avodah zarah.
Well, listen,
definitely just look at Uman.
Listen, it happens to be there's no mitzvah certainly to go. You don't have to go.
You aren't allowed to go. So.
Right, you don't have to go.
By the way, you just brought up a good point, and I think this is like a very important point that in every religion, the priests, right? They're always connected to the dead, necromancy,
right.
And like the bones and mummies, and that all the Christian. He was just mentioning how in the Vatican, it's built.
Right, the tombs are there, the sepulchre.
Judaism does everything to kind of separate, like our religion with death, and kind of like make death like impure, where the priests have to distance themselves from the dead. So we're not a religion that like is about death. We shouldn't even be in graves at all. I mean, there's absolutely there's no precedent, to say that we must go to the grave.
Well, there are some times where it says to go, but like for example on Tisha B'Av or before Yom Kippur, where it says to go as a kapara to remember the day of death and things like that. So I mean, there could be. It's like I said, it's fundamentally it's all about kavanah of the person. You're right that there's a lot of unkosher kavanot that when it comes. People are seeking. You have to, I mean, the reason why so many cults are born and the reason why so much of this stuff is so appealing is because people are seeking, and something easy, some person that they can deify, some character that they can say, this is my connection, I'm going to come here. I mean, what about the kotel? You're not going to go to kotel? People think that if they go, somehow they stand at the kotel, like God can hear me better, from the kotel. It's if the kotel increases your kavanah praying to Hashem, then it's working. If it's because you think that the kotel is a magic, and if I touch the kotel, Hashem,
it's different.
It's another.
Why it's different is because, we also pray towards, like objects. Like
but all these things could be the same. Like
these are reminders.
Yeah, but they're supposed to be, but they all could be like taken the wrong way.
Yeah, but human beings, like we're praying.
That's the most. I agree. That's the most dangerous. That's the most dangerous. That's the most dangerous. You're right. And human beings have a tendency to want to deify other human beings, to make this, and to want to make this person. This is the person. I'm going to address my prayers to this intermediary, or somehow by connecting with them, they're going to save me. It's a very dangerous thing. I agree with you. Yeah. I know. Thank you, everyone.